By the way, like, comment, and subscribe. It helps the algorithm.
All right. People who really want to have a good time won't come to a slaughterhouse. And we've got entirely too many troublemakers here. Too many 40-year-old adolescents, felons, power drinkers, and trustees of modern chemistry. It's going to change. Be nice.
That ain't working.
I want you to be nice.
That ain't working.
And you'll both be nice.
So much as my wife was a giant. But
I want you to be nice until it's time to not be nice.
no, I'm pretty sure that's the way you do it.
The Rees Company.
I will say, I mean, we might as well just dive right into it because we talked about it last week on last week's show about how excited we were about this Beatles documentary.
Yeah.
And, man, I can say, despite my high expectations, it actually exceeded them.
It's
That's
incredible.
Yeah.
I was watching maybe about 2 minutes in. The Avon and I were watching this, and I said, this is amazing. I can't believe we're actually seeing something like this because the footage is so, I don't know if it was restored or just well preserved, but it's like it was shot yesterday. And all of this is, I guess, 52 years old. All this took place 52, damn near 53 years ago.
Right.
So what you get to watch when you see this, it's a completely immersive experience. You're in the studio with the Beatles as they record what becomes Let It Be, but at the outset, their goal was to write and rehearse an entire album, in a fortnight's time, and debut those songs on a television special in front of a studio audience. And that plan evolves over the course of the documentary. And
well, you say they were recording Let It Be, which is basically what happened, but there's so many other songs in there. There's parts of Abbey Road, which of course hadn't been put out yet.
Right. I think Polythene Pam, I definitely heard.
She came in through the bathroom window.
Maxwell Silverhammer.
Yeah.
Yeah, something.
Yeah. And surprisingly, some of their
Golden Slumbers.
Yep, Golden Slumbers. Some of their later solo work is in there. In the very beginning, there's nothing in the studio. There's just 4 chairs. They haven't brought in any of the mixing equipment. It's just no one else was there, and you just see John with a guitar, and he's doing "Jealous Guy."
Yeah, but it's called Road to Marrakesh.
Well, no, that was something else. It was "Child of Nature."
Child of Nature.
He's, I'm just a child of nature, and it's "Jealous Guy," but he hadn't figured out those lyrics yet.
Right.
And of course, that was part of, I believe, the Imagine album. Mm-hmm. There's so many great, that's a couple minutes in.
And that's another thing. They start doing Give Me Some Truth, and John mentions that he and Paul had written that.
Yeah.
And that was a surprise to me because Paul is not co-credited on that on the Imagine album.
Okay.
And perhaps the song evolved to a point where Paul's contributions were diminished. But that was not something I knew, that was originally a song intended for the Beatles. All Things Must Pass, they rehearse early.
Yes. Yeah, that as well. And there's a scene where Paul is singing "So Tired," which I believe is the name of that song, but you know what song
I'm about. So tired, yeah.
Yeah, which, of course, is a John song. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, it's just weird. Why is Paul singing this?
Yeah, it's confusing. Maybe he just liked it. Maybe he had something to do with it. That had already come out, though. One song, another song forgot to mention.
Was that part of the Revolver album?
No, that was on the White Album, which Paul refers to in I believe part 1. He refers to the White Album as the Beatles, which is the proper title. And I wonder if at that time that's still how people referred to that album.
Yeah,
and I
maybe.
wonder when the White Album became the common way of titling it.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that. So Paul was just he was just warming up to that song. He must have liked it. Yeah, So Tired. You know, I was thinking that that was something they were planning on recording, but yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
that had already been put out. So he was just warming up to that song. It was cool to see, because they stopped performing live so early in their career, they never got the chance to do things like have sing each other's songs. swap vocal parts and stuff like that.
Right.
Well, I mean, if they'd kept touring for another 20 years, you would have seen a lot of that. But you didn't get that because they stopped. And that's actually how the documentary starts. It starts off with "In Spite of All the Danger," which was never released. It was released on the anthology album years and years later.
I believe that's the first song they recorded.
It's
correct?
the
It was
first song they ever
original.
Yeah,
Beatles
the first
song.
original song they ever recorded.
And they were teenagers.
I
right?
think it was in the 50s.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's how this documentary starts. And then it takes you through, I would say maybe a 10-minute, just kind of with subtitles, kind of, or whatever the term is.
Titles.
Titles, yeah. It takes you through, this is how they got to this point where they're in the studio trying to record. They're not just trying to record an album. They have 2 weeks to record this album and then perform it on a live TV show.
Right. And the reason why they have 2 weeks is because Ringo has to make a movie
Yeah.
called The Magic Christian, which he subsequently made, and I guess it did all right, but it's not something people remember as much as they remember these songs that are just,
Yeah.
they pull out of themselves.
So somebody should have took Ringo aside and explained priorities to him. You're not going to be known as an actor, dude. But yeah, and then you would think that because of that, he would be a little bit accommodating. But no, there's a whole other thing where he refuses to leave England to perform this thing. They're trying to find a venue that would be, something like the Colosseum, a Roman Colosseum, not the Colosseum, but a Roman Colosseum. And he's like, no, I'm not. I don't want to leave England to shoot this. What the hell, Ringo?
Also, on the other hand, what the hell, Michael Lindsay Hogg, the original director, who appears to be the head of the Libyan tourism board. What dog does he have in making the Beatles perform in Libya?
Well, because it's Christmas time. So you need to go somewhere else to get a warm outdoor. If you're going to do it outdoors, you need to go somewhere else.
You need to go to the Southern Hemisphere.
Well, I think Libya's in the Northern Hemisphere. but-
Well, then you can go to the Southern Hemisphere. You could go to, say, I don't know, Tahiti?
Well, you
Plenty
could
of places you can go. Why
on 2
Libya?
weeks' notice. I don't. You got to keep things kind of close.
Well, they're the
So
Beatles.
I think that's how Libya was the answer. There.
Or no, maybe only the Beach Boys can accomplish that.
Yeah, that was weird, huh?
Yeah, you want to tell the folks?
So
they haven't seen it?
at one point, so like I said, when this first starts, there's absolutely nothing in the studio. It looks like an empty warehouse, and George is like, "Hey, where's the console and the mixer and all that?" And they're just like, "Oh, that'll be here. Don't worry about it." And he's like, "I don't know, man. The sound's really bad. Like, imagine recording in an empty warehouse. Like the acoustics are terrible." But they're just like trying to figure all this out, and then. What were we talking about? Oh, yeah. So then they're like, well, we're going to get 8-track mixers, right? And they're like, no, we're only going to get 4-track mixers. And they're like, well, what? Why? Like, why can't we get like the Beatles? The Beach Boys just had 8-track mixers, and I forget who says it. Who says it? John or Paul? They go, oh yeah, but they're American. Like, what the hell was going on?
Is that a reference to Help? When the doctor who kidnaps Ringo, he's talking about how everything about American technology.
Maybe. I don't remember
Everything
that.
he owns is American because everything American is high tech.
I don't
Was
remember
that like
that
an
part.
inside reference to their own of? Or is it the doctor who kidnaps Ringo?
I don't remember. I haven't seen that in a long time.
I haven't either.
I hope that was the case because otherwise it's pretty depressing.
The Roy Kinnear character in Help.
Okay. It'd be sad that the Beatles were still getting like secondhand treatment in favor of like American, the Beach Boys are great, but
Well,
still, they're not the Beatles.
Yeah. I think that's what that might have been. Noel Gallagher, everybody knows. I'm a big fan of the Gallagher brothers, also known as Oasis.
Sure.
Noel Gallagher said something a few years ago in an interview. He did Desert Island Discs. It's a show on BBC where people give 5 records that they would take to a desert island if they were going to be stranded there,
Gotcha.
and then do nothing with because you can't play them. I don't know
no
what
electricity.
would be the point. Yeah. So Noel
Maybe
played-
some sort of solar powered type of thing would get the job done.
Yeah, I'd prefer a boat.
Well, sure. Yeah.
I'm not going to think, oh, geez, which psychedelic furs right? No, I'll have a boat of any kind.
An interesting point. Did you ever wonder why the professor on Gilligan's Island couldn't just fix that goddamn boat?
All right, okay, all right.
Why has no one thought of this before?
Okay, so anyway, Noel Gallagher's on Desert Island Discs, and he picks his 5 songs. He picks one by a Manchester act, I think like a house act called A Guy Called Gerald. He picks a Pink Floyd song, a David Bowie song, a Beatles song, and I think a U2 song.
Okay.
And the DJ says to him, well, what about American bands? Are you not interested in American bands? And he says, well, I like the Doors and the Stooges, but apart from that, not really. And the interviewer says, well, what about the Beach Boys? And he says, no, the only reason why people like the Beach Boys is because Paul McCartney likes them. But if you listen to them, all they are is barbershop quartet. And ever since he said that, that's how I've heard I can't, as they say as the kids, I can't unhear that.
I will tell you, even not hearing that, I always thought that anyway. Never been much of a fan. There's a couple songs I like, but otherwise I don't get it. I don't really get it.
Yeah, I like some of their stuff, but I
Yeah.
think Noel and apparently you make an excellent point when it comes to that. But not to take this away from the Beatles, back to Let It Be, or I guess the making of Let It Be. George writes "I Me Mine." He comes in and he's talking about it. How he wrote this song after watching a made-for-TV movie called Europa. He was inspired by a ballroom scene where they were doing a waltz.
Well, if it's anything like the made-for-TV movies we watch, this song is probably about rape.
Well, one of my long-held beliefs that this film shattered, I had the impression, because it's what George actually said, that I Me Mine, the lyrics of I Me Mine, referred not to rape, but how common those words show up in Eastern religious and philosophy texts. But there's no mention of this in the film as he excitedly tells Ringo about this song he wrote the night before.
Yeah, this is actually my favorite scene in part one, because it's just, when it starts out, it's just George and Ringo and some other guy, maybe that Hog guy, I don't know. But the three of them are standing around, and George is so excited about this new song he wrote, And Ringo's like, yeah, man, all right. So Paul walks in, and George is like, hey, man, you want to hear my new song? Paul's like, yeah, sure, why not? And George starts playing this, and Paul's just like, And then he goes, is that grammatical? Flowing more freer than wine? Shouldn't it be more freely than wine? And George is like, why are you nitpicking my song, man? And then he keeps playing it, and now John walks in, and John just totally shits on the whole thing. He's like, all right, I have the exact quote here. He says, Harrison's fisher wives and dwarves and hunchbacks. Run along, son. We'll see you later. I mean, I don't know. That's like typical John, what the hell is he even talking about? But you kind of get it anyway. Right? And then he goes, we're a rock and roll band, And George says, I don't care if you don't want it. I don't give a fuck. And John says, it can go and be musical, George. Do you have any idea what we play?
Interesting. And then John presents everybody with Across the Universe.
Yeah.
Which I wouldn't exactly call.
Yeah. It's
You shook me all night long.
It's much like I Me Mine.
Right,
It's,
right.
Yeah, aesthetic. But
Yeah, I don't know what the issue was there.
yeah, but it's funny, and obviously I didn't do it justice, but it's very funny to see how dismissive Paul and John are of anything George wrote, and it leads really to the culmination of part one, which I don't know if we jump right to or if there's more, but we might as well just say part one ends with George walking out on the band.
Right.
And it's briefly mentioned earlier in part one. Somebody asked, I think John, they're like, is this the first time someone has quit the band? He goes, no, Ringo did too. And it's not really addressed. Maybe it is later. But I kind of know that Ringo he probably was feeling like George was feeling, like, why am I even here? So he quit the band at one point. And
do you know what point that was?
It must have been briefly, not long before this film.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, like it wasn't in the early days, obviously.
Because I was wondering, because Paul brings up Jimmy Nicol a couple of times, the guy who filled in on one tour for Ringo.
Okay.
And about how terrible he was. He was distracted by the women. Did you see that?
I didn't pick up on that.
So he started. He would come in late on every song because he was just overwhelmed with Beatlemania.
Yeah.
And suddenly you find you're just a dude.
Right.
Suddenly you're portraying Ringo in the Beatles. That's a very unique position.
Yeah, but so they went to Ringo and they're like, look,
But see, here's what I was wondering: if
Okay.
that was when Ringo had quit, that he wasn't sick. I was wondering if it was.
No,
perhaps
I don't
because
think it
that was fairly early.
I'm pretty sure it was past their touring days when they
Okay.
were a studio only band. And they went over to Ringo's house and they're like, look, just come back. Like, you don't even have to play the drums anymore. Just don't break up the band. And then we saw a similar thing here where George leaves. And I don't know if you want to do it or I want to do it. But this is my second favorite part, maybe my favorite part,
Do it, Chris.
where George leaves and he says, I'll see you boys at the clubs, which apparently they say was a reference to something somebody else had said. I didn't know what they were talking about.
I'm not familiar.
Yeah. But anyway, so they're all sitting around and they're like, oh, let's go to lunch. And they go to lunch, they come back, and they're all just horsing around, just playing like nonsense. They do not care at all that
But
George
it
left.
seems to me I saw a lot more alcohol making the rounds.
Yeah.
After George quit.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of fed into the fun atmosphere that ensued.
Yeah.
I think that they were kind of they were faced with this crisis. They didn't seem to treat it as one, but I think deep down they saw it as one.
Perhaps. Yeah.
And that was their way of dealing with it. Well, let's just get pissed, as they say, and have fun. Hopefully George will come back tomorrow.
Well, they had another way of dealing with it, which is John says, if he's not back by Tuesday, we get Clapton. Which is my favorite line of part one. Like how just like whatever, dude, he's replaceable. You got this other guy, Clapton. And then, like they're just assuming that Clapton would be like, sure. Like, why wouldn't I be in the Beatles?
You know the story with Clapton and George, right?
Oh, yeah.
You're talking about Patty Boyd.
Patty Boyd. And,
I figured that kind of adds a little.
I don't
Was
know
that
that
before or after?
Oh, that
I
was
don't
well
know
after.
Yeah, that was after.
yeah. So,
That hadn't happened.
That happened after.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that hadn't happened
Like
yet.
in the 70s.
Yeah.
Like 72, 73.
Whenever Layla was written, that was the catalyst for all that.
Yeah.
That's why I thought Layla was 68.
Oh, no. Layla was in the 70s.
Okay. Well, forget me then. Let me just turn my mic off.
But speaking of how long ago things were,
Do we need to detail that story? We're trying to draw
we
in.
can.
It's an amazing story that
Well,
if you're
let's-
into rock history. But
Let's see how much of it we remember. Now, George Harrison married a woman called Patty Boyd.
Beautiful, stunning blonde.
She inspired something.
Okay.
She inspired Layla. She inspired perhaps even Wonderful Tonight. Or,
Right.
How many? You could name any number of classic Eric Clapton and George Harrison songs that this woman inspired. In fact, she should be known as the tits that wrote the hits.
that's a T-shirt.
She had an admirer in Eric Clapton, shall we say, who was very good friends, if not best friends, with George Harrison. And Eric fell in love with her. And the song Layla and other assorted love songs, every song on that album is about Patty Boyd. Now, they're not yet together. From what I understand, what drew them together is that Eric showed her some sort of a container with heroin in it and said to her, if you don't go out with me, I'm going to take this heroin. And she said, well, okay, well, then you sound like a reasonable person to spend the next several years of my life with. So she left George Harrison, and it caused a rift between them, but not for very long. The really part is that they eventually all saw the funny side,
Yeah.
and everything was fine.
Yeah, it's weird, man.
And eventually Eric and Patty divorced and whatever, and then Sheryl Crow, and I don't even...
Can you
I don't
imagine
know how quickly you want to...
she's married to a guy, Rod Weston. Can you imagine him, around the parties? Yeah. So, so what do you do, Rod? I'm a trash man.
I'm just a grease monkey.
Just a grease monkey. See, we're not even going to watch that part of the next motion picture. Maybe we should. Maybe we should go back.
Oh, we definitely
got
gotta watch that
on
part.
that scene.
that was just in there. We just didn't realize that, but it was just in there. We just saw that.
Oh, okay. All right.
Just like the 11 songs that were named after or inspired by Patty Boyd.
Inspired by. Now, I don't want to get too inside, but I'm also a big Donovan fan. And he was dating when they all went to India, which is also in a later episode of Get Back. There's footage that Paul and John shot while they were visiting with the Maharishi.
That's in part one?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I think that's later.
But because we're talking about Patty Boyd, she had a sister, perhaps still does, called Jennifer, who was with Donovan.
Oh, okay.
And his song, Jennifer Juniper, is about Jennifer Boyd.
Wow.
So it's a very influential set of related body parts.
Yeah, and Culture Club had a song about Oil Can Boyd.
All right. Well, now we're getting a little far. I don't know if that was a joke or what that was.
I don't know. I can't imagine Culture Club being familiar with it.
Yeah, how would they know who he is?
Terrible joke that will be edited out of the show.
No, I think it should stay.
That's got to stay in.
I think it should be in the intro. I think that's the first thing anybody should see when they dial this up.
I didn't think you guys were going to even know who that was.
Oh, yeah, he was a pitcher for the Red Sox in the 80s, correct?
Oh, I thought he was part of the Big Red Machine. No? He was later?
He might have been. I'm
pretty sure he was.
I associate him with the Red Sox in the 80s, but I could be wrong. So talking of how long ago this was shot and how great it looks, now to do kind of a corollary here, in the time this footage was shot, it would be like if the Beatles in this were somehow watching footage of that quality that was recorded in 1917.
Yeah. It's weird how long ago this was. Man.
Yeah.
This is before any of us were born.
Yeah.
Well, all the Beatles were. I mean, the whole Beatles thing was before
Yeah,
any of us. But,
everything. I mean, they broke up at least a decade before I was born.
and they were the most. Oh shit! How do I put this? They sold more records in the 2000s than any other band.
Is that true?
It's either I think I'm referring to the decade of the 2000s, like 2000 to 2010.
Right.
Yeah, they outsold every other band. It's amazing the longevity and just how. I mean, my 11-year-old daughter loves them. You know.
Well, she should, and all kids should.
Yeah, everyone should.
Another thing that surprised me is the song "Get Back." It started out as a protest song against the beliefs of Enoch Powell, who was a diverse figure in British politics. He was very anti-immigration, sort of the Nigel Farage of his time. But the protest angle gets abandoned. And the song evolves into a tune about, I guess, trans people smoking weed. Gee, Chris, I wonder what, if anything, made Paul suddenly anti-immigration.
Specifically from the island of Japan, maybe.
Perhaps.
But I'll tell you, it did not start as a protest song. It started off as, and this was amazing to me. Like they're all just sitting around, like, man, we only got like 10 days, and we got to do a freaking concert. We got nothing, and Paul is just like blah 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 blah, you know, just tuning around on his guitar, and within 2 minutes, he has the skeleton of "Get Back." Like it seemingly comes from absolutely nowhere. He like within 2 minutes, he has the basis of it, you know, not the lyrics, but you know, and it's just amazing. He does this like 2 more times just in this part. I think one of the other ones was I have it here somewhere. The Long and Winding Road, same thing. He's just tooling around, and you know, you could say, oh, well, maybe he had written that the night before, but man, that's not the way it comes across at all.
But
it
also
seems
still,
like he's creating it in the moment.
But still, even if he had written it the night before, it's still very impressive.
Yeah. It's impressive just to write that song, but
In fact, I think the notes you sent me, the way you phrased it, is he pulled that song out of his ass.
yeah, and that and The Long and Winding Road, they just seem to be, because he's so under pressure. Like they get down to like it's a week to go when George quits, and they really have almost nothing. They don't know where the show's going to take place because Ringo won't fly out of England, and George doesn't want to record in a studio that they're in now while this is filming because he thinks the acoustics suck, which obviously you could fix, you know. You got a television crew in there, they're going to whatever.
Yeah, but they have only 2 weeks. If there's an audio issue, that takes about, I think we know, Chris, it takes about 6 months.
It's a solid 6 months
Yeah.
to get your microphone.
They didn't have that kind of time.
Did they have 2 seasons?
You know what? You know, I remember there's one scene where John's complaining about the gain.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Because I've watched this entire documentary. I've watched all 3 episodes. I understand, Chris, you have not. And I can tell you, at no point, with all the audio issues they have, using 2 different studios, not one person ever mentions gain.
Yeah. Gain is Hamboy's go-to excuse for why things aren't working properly.
I actually think Paul does mention gain. I think he does. But it might have been for the same reason, to cover up that he screwed something up royally.
Dugan's the one who introduced the word gain in here.
Well, it's easy to blame people when they're not here, so let's go with that.
Oh, man.
What were we talking about just before we got onto that?
Paul's prolificness.
Yes, and like right after he does the Long and Winding Road, which I said seems to come just like Get Back out of completely nowhere, he launches into Golden Slumbers and Carry That Weight, which we'd said before they didn't even make it onto what they were doing this album. It made it onto Abbey Road, which actually came out before this album. You know, it's all
Right.
They were basically recording 2 albums, you know, that were going on here. But man, it's such a powerful scene. I keep saying this is my favorite scene. Now I'm on my third favorite scene. But like while he's doing these 3 songs, like Ringo's just sitting next to him, and like he's like, even Ringo's kind of like in awe. Like, where is all this coming from, man? Like, and it's just Paul just being like, I only got 7 days. No one else is writing anything. You know, I got to get to work here. And George shows up in the middle of all this with a Wendy's breakfast baconator, being like, "Yeah, this is a rough night," you know, like, and Linda is shooting photos. Linda, who would later become Linda McCartney, Linda Eastman, I guess she was at the time.
Yeah.
But she's shooting photos, and I swear at one point when she pulls the camera away, she wipes a tear out of her eyes. She could have just been wiping her eye, but she definitely made that motion, and it's like, it really was like, if you were his girlfriend, you probably would have been drawn to tears by just watching this guy. You're watching a genius at work, you know?
Right.
Yeah. Oh, and Carry That Weight, which I mentioned was one of these 3 songs. That was like a bar sing along, like a pub song originally,
Like a common public domain sort of thing.
Yeah.
It wasn't.
Well, no, not public domain, but just like the spirit of it was like, you know, you would be in a bar and we're all be da da da, you know, like that kind of thing. Originally.
Oh, so that's the spirit in which it was written.
Yeah.
Yeah. But was Golden Slumbers not a lullaby?
Maybe. I mean, that would make sense given the name.
I think that was traditional.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I have a whole other, like, I don't know.
Well, Chris, knock yourself out.
I got a lot of notes. Like, I could just run through, like, weird observations that I made. But, you know, if we have an actual conversation, that'd be better. But I can just throw these out.
Please,
did you notice the weird Buddhist guy at the beginning?
There were 2.
Yeah.
2, and I don't think they were Buddhists. They were Hare Krishnas.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Who I guess
You're
some
right.
way tangentially or perhaps hands-on, George was involved with in some way. But
Yeah.
he didn't get the mohawk, so I'm not sure how committed he was.
Right.
But yeah, those were there were 2 of them who showed up just randomly.
And
so
the caption just said "Friends of George."
Friends of George's.
or "Friends of George," I guess.
Yeah,
More
but
grammatical.
it is.
It's not grammatical.
It is kind of odd when you see this. You see how Yoko wasn't the only non-Beatle in the studio.
Right. Linda was there, of course.
Linda was there. Various Hare Krishnas.
Yeah, and while they're showing these Hare Krishna guys, George goes, "Oh, you're recording our conversations?" Like he didn't even realize. Like he thought they were just there to like shoot music videos. I think like he didn't realize up until that point that this was going to be a documentary.
Right.
I don't know I don't know where George's head was in any of this. I know you're like a George fan because you'd mentioned on the last show that you thought he had the most successful solo career.
Well, I thought he had the most solid solo career.
I mean, I disagree on that, but it's not worth arguing over. But when I'm watching this, George almost comes off like the villain in this whole thing. Like, I really don't know what he was thinking at any part of this.
Well, don't you think after years of frustration of not being recognized as being a viable songwriter, a contributor to the
He
group
was not
apart
a
from-
viable songwriter, though. He became that. He basically studied under the 2 greatest songwriters of the time.
And he learned, and by that point,
Right.
he was on a par with them, in my opinion.
Well, or close, but he was definitely nowhere near that point.
Close enough for them to not laugh at his contributions.
Well, if you look at his contributions in the early albums, and he was nowhere, you could see why John and Paul wouldn't think he was on their level. It would have taken a few more years of, him writing hits before they would start to recognize him as being on their level.
No, I think probably the most...
And that's nothing to be, like, even if you're like, I'm not getting the recognition, like, you're part of the freaking Beatles. Like, how much more recognition do you need? You know? I feel like George came across as very unreasonable in this whole thing.
Well, I
That's
think
my
if
take.
you know you can play in that league and you're not having the opportunity, you're not having the at-bats, then it's going to frustrate you.
But is he even really that great of a guitarist when they're just ready to drop him for Clapton at the drop of a hat? Like, no one ever mentions George Harrison as being one of the great guitarists of all time.
I think one of the most influential guitarists for sure.
You think?
He doesn't have the chops that Clapton had, but Clapton, as I said on the last show, had no feeling. He
Yeah.
plays like an autistic.
This is where we venture into territory where I don't know what I'm talking about, and I'm making shit up as I go along. So I will defer to you on this.
Well, the most famous part of the original version of this, which was called Let It Be, there was a documentary that they used. Here's what happened. This Michael Lindsay Hogg character, he shot 60 hours of footage of the Beatles recording this music. He took, I guess, an hour of that and turned it into basically Paul and George arguing.
Now, I'm sorry, Steve. I got distracted. There was a release of Let It Be? I thought it was never released.
Oh, no, it was released, but the footage was turned into basically the crux of the film was just the Beatles rehearsing and then Paul and George arguing. Now, we saw the scene. That's the most famous scene in the original.
Yeah. Well, that's where George is like, "I'll play whatever you want me to play."
Yes.
Oh, actually, I think I wrote the actual dialogue down here. Yeah. So Paul says, "I'm scared of being the boss, and I have been for a couple years." Now, they go into this, too, because, of course, their manager, Brian Epstein, had died
Right.
a year or two before, right after Sgt. Pepper, somewhere around there. And at that point, they just always did what he told them to do. And at that point,
And they trusted his judgment, and he didn't fail them.
yeah, obviously he did well. He made them the most famous group in the world. But at that point, they were just kind of like floundering, and Paul decided, like, I don't want this band to break up, you know. So he kind of took the lead on things. And at one point, John says, "We've all been in the doldrums since Mr. Epstein passed away. It's discipline we lack." So Paul tried to give him that discipline, but they didn't want to hear it. You know, you don't want to hear it from your peer. You know, even though Epstein was only a few years older than them, he was still their manager, and he wasn't part of the band. So he was like, "Okay, you be the boss. You don't want your friend to be your boss. That's never a good situation."
Right.
So Paul's saying, "I'm scared of being a boss, you know, and I have been for years now." And John, he doesn't want to yell at George on camera. And John says, "Forget about candid camera." Again, that's how John speaks, you know. It's all in metaphors and allusions and everything.
Bit of a carrot.
Yeah. And Paul says, "I never get any support, so I just say fuck it." And George says, and this is the part you're referring to, the famous part. George says, "I'll play whatever you want me to play, or I won't play at all if it will please you. And I don't think you really know what that one is." And what that last line meant is Paul's trying to tell him how to play the song, and George is saying, I don't think you have it figured out yet. I'm trying to help you figure it out. You know, like they're having a legitimate disagreement, much as I just, you know, said George was being unreasonable. Here, I see his side.
Oh,
here.
there we go.
Yeah.
But what I remember, and I haven't rewatched the original since watching this, but I don't remember that discussion being portrayed that fully in the original. As I remember it, because I remember George saying, "Well, I'll play what you want me to play, or I won't play at all."
Yeah.
I remember that. I don't remember Paul talking about the pressures of being the boss and how he doesn't really want to.
I don't think it made it in.
No. And so this, in many ways, this documentary changes history as we know it. But that is one of them. I mean, Paul wasn't necessarily being an aggressor or an oppressor. He was just trying to figure out where the band was at that time.
And yeah, man, I mean, there's really another thing that kind of that narrative that's been out there for so long until this film is that John and Paul were drifting apart. And this totally dispels that. You can see so many moments. Sorry, I'm getting over a cold. You can see so many moments where they're clearly like completely in tune with each other. Just a couple of let me see. I have it in here somewhere. Right after George leaves, there's a scene where you think that John and Paul are arguing, and then you realize they're just like doing like a skit for the camera. Paul says to John, "Have you written anything else? We're going to be faced with a crisis." And John says, "When I'm up against the wall, Paul, you'll find I'm at my best." Which, how the hell did how did that not make it to a song lyric? But but it seems like there are like that dialogue doesn't sound like an argument, but in the context it does, and you realize it's just for show. And then like right after that, they're playing face to face, like they're standing 2 feet apart. And they said, I've seen from other things that's originally when they first started writing songs, that's how they did it. They would just stand 2 feet apart playing for hours, and that's how they came up with all their first songs.
You know why?
No,
The Everly Brothers.
oh, that's how they did it too.
Yeah, they would stand that way when they performed, and the Beatles emulated that.
But there's a lot of other moments where you just see, it's nothing that was said. It's just you see the looks between John and Paul,
Right.
and you realize they were still like best friends. They weren't. There's no point where you see John annoyed at Yoko. He may have been. He probably was, but it's never overt.
Oh, I don't think John actually wanted Yoko there. I think he just allowed it because he knew it would annoy other people.
Yeah, he did like to get a rise out of
Right.
people. Yeah.
I'm not sure. I don't remember it that well. Did they ever rehearse "Don't Let Me Down"? Chris,
Yes.
they rehearsed it like 40 fucking times.
Oh, okay.
I don't think there's a more rehearsed song in the history of music, and the lyrics keep changing.
Yes.
And they're trying to figure it out. And this is, as I said, I watched this with the A-Bomb, and she said, "Can someone just tell them what the lyrics are? Who doesn't know this song?
well, but
Put on a radio. It'll be on in 15 minutes."
but a guy does. It's a guy named Glenn who I don't know who Glenn is.
Glenn Johns was the I guess he was the engineer. I thought he was the producer, but I guess Phil Spector ended up being the producer. But yeah, he was one of the producers.
I mean, Yeah.
As the hands-on guy in the studio, he was very much the producer.
He's the guy who says to him, he says, "You sing the first line, you two sing the second line, and then the three of you sing the third line." And once they do that, it's you're like, "Oh, that's don't let me down." Like it becomes the song. Like before that, it was just like they're just kind of meandering, and there's no. It's not the song that we all know. But yeah, that guy should probably get a writing credit because they were lost before that. Before he just figured it out. I don't know how much longer we want to go on. I've like two more observations.
Well,
I'll
yeah,
just
please,
make.
let's hear them.
When you listen to what the album that these sessions eventually became, we said it's Abbey Road and, I'm sorry.
And Let It Be.
Let It Be. When you listen to Let It Be, there's a song that really stands out as unique on there. And of course, I'm talking about One After 909.
Yeah.
Because it sounds like 1964 Beatles or earlier. And I always wondered whether or not it was just a song that they never got around to recording, or if they intentionally decided, hey, what if we did a song back like how we used to do it? Well, it turns out it's the former.
Right.
Because it says like because they only had 2 weeks, they're like, man, do we have any old stuff we can trot out there and try and make work? And they do. Like it shows them trying these different songs, but apparently this is the only one where they're like, yeah, this will work. And John says, I wrote that when I was 15. 15. And it's such a good song, man.
And it was released on one of the anthology records. The original is actually, they did record it in the early 60s.
Yeah, okay.
So there is a
never
version
released.
of that out there, yeah.
And John, and like after that, John's like explaining lyrics. He's like, you're waiting for a girl on the train, and they're all like laughing, like the good old days are still like so like funny to them and stuff. I don't know what I'm saying.
Right,
but,
and also there's so little time. I mean, think about 6 years ago.
Yeah.
Not that long ago.
Yeah.
Well, let's not think about 6. Sorry, Chris.
No, I see what you're saying. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it goes by pretty quickly, and imagine how many changes came. Okay, Chris, let's stop talking about
that's
this.
what makes the Beatles such a great story. Is it basically their story encompasses the entire the decade of the '60s,
Right.
And they go from rockabilly, slick your hair back and wear leather jackets band to what they became.
To historical figures.
Yeah, it's so remarkable. There's nothing else like that story. And just one more observation. It's not even
Chris.
it's not even that poignant, but obla di, obla da, life goes on.
Yeah.
The original lyric.
Thanks for singing it that way, because we won't get demonetized for that.
Yeah, because I totally butchered it. But obla da was originally oh my god. That was oh my god.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
Yeah, I didn't know that. This is pretty cool. I don't know why they changed it, but whatever. I'm not going to second guess Paul McCartney.
Yeah, please.
In his choice of lyrics.
So, you definitely enjoyed it. I definitely enjoyed it. Now, I have watched the rest. I will watch the rest again if that's okay. And next week, we'll encapsulate and comment on part 2, the things that surprised us, the things we enjoyed. And you can join us, too, if you haven't seen it yet and you like the Beatles, and who doesn't. Being a Beatles fan is like being, you may as well say earthling, right?
Yeah.
So definitely check it out if you have access to Disney+.